Have you ever used people close to you as a shield between your actions and their consequences? In July of 2020, Ocasio-Cortez actually spoke to the House about her being fed up with this excuse. I hope that in this video you can gain some tips to use as future speechwriters in your speeches. And before we dive on into it, let's get a little bit of background.
I was minding my own business, walking up the steps, and Representative Yoho put his finger in my face. He called me disgusting. He called me crazy. He called me out of my mind.
Now let's focus in on some of the techniques that Ocasio-Cortez uses, and she does this in a variety of ways. The first being her use of argument repetition and arrangement strategically, in particular the use of anaphora. Anaphora is the repetition of words in a phrase or connecting sentences that is usually used to emphasize a point that you really want to sink in. Have you ever heard somebody say, you need to hear something multiple times, around 3 times, before you can actually understand what it's saying? It's time to meet John. John Medina is a biologist that focuses in on brain development, and his research shows that the brain can only actually hold 7 new pieces of information every 30 seconds. This is why we need repetition. Repetition allows us to extend that 30 seconds and have new information stay in our brains longer. Let's go back to the speech that we're here to analyze today, the one by Ocasio-Cortez. And she uses anaphora in a variety of ways. The first being when she is talking about this kind of language not being new to women. She says, all of us have had to deal with this in some form, some way, some shape, at some point in our lives. By repeating these phrases in the beginning of all of these sentences, it's sort of letting the audience anticipate what's going to come next. And by eliminating this element of surprise, you're therefore allowing the audience to fully process and understood this information further, because they don't have to think about what's going to come next. And this rhetorical device continues throughout her speech. I think anaphora is used about 6 times, and I think the strongest place that it was used is in the conclusion. As I play this next clip, pay attention to her use of anaphora in this concluding sentence. Do you see it correlating with anything?
I want to thank him for showing the world that you can be a powerful man and accost women. You can have daughters and accost women without remorse. You can be married and accost women. You can take photos and project an image to the world of being a family man and accost women without remorse and with a sense of impunity.
The pauses that follow accost women allows these statements to sink in even more, and it makes people hold themselves responsible for this sort of language used towards women. Anaphora was a powerful way to end Ocasio-Cortez's speech, but let's rewind a little farther up in the speech when she's starting to talk about she was a working class citizen. She says that she's been called many offensive things as she's waiting tables, riding the subway, or even just walking the streets of New York City. She mentions, quote, this kind of language is not new. This actually becomes a common theme throughout her speech. Ocasio-Cortez focuses on the arrangement to make sure that this singular point becomes very clear. Let's return to our friend John. John Medina's expertise in brain development says that consistently re-exposing yourself to the same kind of information sparingly can actually improve your ability to retain that information. Oftentimes, a main point may get lost in the facts and the stories in this big evidence portioning associated with the speech. And oftentimes, the overall thesis gets lost within all of this. Ocasio-Cortez prevents this by tying every piece of evidence and information back to this main point, that dehumanizing women and using this sort of derogatory language is not new, but it needs to stop. All in all, after her experience as a working woman, we go into her experience as an elected official, and I'll save you from all of the gory details of this, but I would say that she still ties it back to this same message. She says, dehumanizing women is not new. Although she did not use the exact same words as she's repeating this thesis over and over throughout the speech, By using different words and actually rephrasing it, she can allow more of the audience to be able to understand and take in what that message really is meant to say. It's time for the finale. The one thing that I have really incorporated into speeches, she incorporates it a bunch into her speech, and it is the fact that what we do with our notes matters. Many great speeches are pre-written, and that makes sense. They want to go through all these editing processes. They want to make sure it sounds great. But one thing about pre-written speeches is oftentimes the speaker is sitting there and reading all of their notes the entire time. Arranging your notes in paragraph pre-written speech form can actually cause more harm than good. And this is for a variety of ways, specifically two. The first being that you lose your eye contact of gazing out into the audience. And the second being placement. Oftentimes, if you were to have paragraph written notes, you lose your place after you go off on a tangent. And then what? But don't you worry, there's a solution. Use bullet points to structure your notes. This way you can easily find out where your next talking point is and quickly skim through to see which ones you have already done. Ocasio-Cortez uses the advantages of keeping her notes short and sweet, and she makes sure that her notes are more sculpting what she's going to say instead of writing exactly what she's going to say. Let's take a look at some of the results from this. She projects confidence, sincerity. You may notice that as she's talking, she rarely looks down at her notes. Rather, she'll talk for a while, then pause, glance at her notes, and continue speaking. But here's where it gets interesting. About a week or so after she gave her speech in the House, she actually posted her notes on Instagram. She said in her caption, "I got to the House floor about 10 minutes before my speech and scribbled down some quick notes after reflecting on what had transpired over the last few days. Pictured here are all the notes I had, and from there I improvised my composition and spoke live." It's not often that we have the opportunity to be able to see a speaker's notes, and I think that Ocasio-Cortez shows us a great example of how a smooth speech can come off of using bulleted point notes. It was so good that people actually thought that her speech was pre-written and called her out on that, which prompted the post to Instagram. Overall, Ocasio-Cortez's speech to the House is a great example of a powerful speech. She uses rhetorical analysis and she structures her speech in a way that re-emphasizes her points throughout the entire thing. Before I leave, I want to emphasize this point in terms of food. Just as every addition of different spices adds to the overall flavor of soup, if you spend time focusing on the little details, such as how your notes are written or how your content is organized, the overall speech is going to improve. Thanks for watching. I'm Jamie Christiansen, and I can't wait for you to write some stellar speeches.